Yo, what's up everybody? My name is Fitz and I'm here to talk about how I prepare for maps and how I progress through them. Because I've actually noticed that, given that I'm just, as you might say that I am a casual in Path of Exile because, I don't go for those top builds that are usually out there. I usually just go on my own thing. These particular things that I do to prepare for maps and while I progress through the maps have always helped me out whether or not the build that I'm going for is common already or like in the meta or something that's totally new and totally unique or basically just like an experiment that we've been doing. So yeah, these things that I do are typically the things that help me progress through the Atlas pretty easy. So of course, with the new skills that are going to come out, there are going to be a lot of people that may want to practice those skills as well. So we will have to wait on how the damage scales and all that. But at least with preparing your character properly for the amounts of damage that you will receive, because that is the scariest part of the map, or the maps rather, you will at least be able to try and adjust your damage accordingly. At least that's how I do. So yeah, hope you all enjoy it, and of course be sure to follow our Twitch. I stream there every day, but I've been taking a short break recently because it's been kind of boring in the league, and I haven't had any other games to play with much. But we will definitely stream the other parts of the content reveal that is going to come up, and of course the league start itself. I will be streaming from day one up until I guess we get bored, and I will take on some practicing for hardcore as well. I haven't played hardcore in all of my 7 years of gameplay, so that is going to be interesting for the next league. I will go hardcore, so yeah, maybe that's what we're gonna do. And you can also leave a subscribe to the YouTube channel. That will also help a lot, and you can follow our Facebook page as well because I also stream there from time to time. And yeah, that's basically it. So without further ado, let us proceed to the checklist, eh? Alright, so let's go. You've killed Kitava. You've completed the campaign. And now you've just finished the side quest to get the map device. Now we are just about to get into maps. Maybe, you've been lucky and you have a couple maps that were dropped along the way, maybe during Act 9 or in Act 10 as well. But of course, the first thing that you really have to do, like most especially with me, since I typically play with softcore anyway, or play at softcore, I will try to first craft any missing resistances that I need, because of course during Act 5 you have a minus 30% to all of your resistances, and in Act 10 after finishing that you get minus 60, so it is basically a pretty strong handicap, right? So what I typically do is I check my gear and resistances first. I won't be going too in depth on what to particularly go for because of course an evasion character is going to be built differently so to speak compared to some other builds that will use a mix of evasion and armor, or pure armor, or evasion and energy shield. But at least the general tip that I can go for here and inform you is that you want to try and see if you can get your resistances, if not to 75% for your elemental resistances, try to get them as close to 75% as possible all around. So what I usually do with that is that I try to see if I can buy items that have a good amount of life and 2 resistances, and then if nothing good shows up, I will try to look for an item that will at least have a good roll of life and a good roll of res, because usually you can get away with that during the league start. You can see some items that will have like 50 life, 60 life, or maybe even 70 life, and have tier 3 res, which is actually pretty high, and then look for an open suffix so that I can craft any missing resistances in. So that's how I would usually look for things in priority of order. I would look for gear that would have a good roll of life and 2 res. If not, I will look for gear that has a good roll of life and 1 res and an open suffix. And then if not, I'm just gonna go and look for gear that will either have a high tier amount of life and an open suffix so I can at least craft something on it, or just look for an item that has multiple resistances but an open prefix so then I can craft the life instead. So looking for the crafting recipes during the league start is actually very, very helpful, most especially when you can get the tier 5 life and the other global defenses, which will be further out into the game. And of course there are also other guides which will show you where and how you can get them quickly. And of course you can also look up the wiki. They are always they have a good list on where you can find all of the crafting recipes. Now, going to the aspect of prefixes and suffixes, or otherwise known as the affixes of an item. Some new players or some casuals may not be aware of this, but underneath the option, or underneath the UI tab rather, in your options, you should always have your advanced mod descriptions on, or at least I do it for, you know, convenience, because what that does is that if you don't have that on, for example, and we go to our inventory, you can see here that if you press Alt, it will only show the item level of the rare item that you're hovering over, right? But if you have advanced mod descriptions on, once you highlight that, they will show you all of the prefixes and all of the suffixes. So this will at least give you you know, a little bit of an easier time in figuring out whether or not you can craft on an item or not. And on the trade side, that will also be labeled as P1 or S1, where usually P just means prefix and the number will be the tier. So of course, as long as we all know, the higher the tier of the affix, the lower the number will be. So you would basically want to look for something that is, you know, tier 2 or tier 1 in the roles that you want, but of course they will be pretty expensive at the league start. But at least that is what I've mentioned, where it will always be easy, or easier rather, to go for an item that has at least 2 of the affixes that you need, either a prefix or a suffix or whatever you may need, and have an open affix which you can craft onto with your crafting bench. So it's always gonna be good to go and get your crafting recipes whenever you can find them on the map, and double check the wiki as well. If you feel like you're missing something, you can always check there, and you will be going through a list of the places where you can find the crafting bench recipes, and that will help you out like really much. Really, yeah, just all right. So the next thing that I would go for, like for example, I've already maxed out my resistances, or at least gotten them as close to 75% as I could. The next thing I will do is that I will double check on my guard skill if I do have one, or if not, I will look for a guard skill and, you know, of course apply the usual mechanics to it. Like for example, most people typically go with the steel skin on your left click, so you're constantly activating steel skin as you run around. Or what I do is, like, typically when I start maps, I also try to get myself an average, so to speak. And this is one thing that a lot of people have not mentioned actually. I don't know why, but getting your averages, or at least levels of numbers that you're comfortable with, is actually pretty good in at least, you know, providing yourself like a form of muscle memory to go for when you're going to maps. Like for example, what I usually do is that if I play a melee character, I will also try to get myself to at least 4,000 life, or as close to 4,000 life as possible. And if it's going to be a ranged character or a spellcaster, which will of course be at a distance, since I am less likely to get hit, I will be at least a little bit more comfortable with, you know, maybe 3000 life and ES combined, or somewhere about. And after that, I check on my guard skill, and like for example, if I'm gonna go with a cast when damage taken setup, I will try to level them up at least a little bit, so that of course you will also get higher benefits when the guard skills have a little bit more levels in them. So what I usually do is that if, for example, I have a 4000 HP melee character, like Cyclone for example, and I can gain endurance charges, what I do is I at least level up the cast when damage taken up until it activates at close to 1000 damage, and then I level up Immortal Call as well to bring it as close to the level requirements of cast when damage taken as possible. So at least at every 1/4 of my HP being lost, that is when Immortal Call kicks in, and of course, since it is a higher level, it gets to provide higher bonuses to me. Okay, so let's say that, for example, we've already done our gear adjustments, we've managed our guard skills, we've crafted anything that we were missing. What I'm going to do after that is to double check my Flask layout. Now, I would say that it is typically a good example anyway, whether or not you are in softcore, to pick up any flasks that you find lying around, especially the utility flasks. And during Act 9 or Act 10 thereabouts, that is in the time where the divine and the eternal life flasks will start dropping. So of course, if you are a life-based character, that's always going to be best to get them. And the divine flask is usually the best flask to go for when you're a life-based character anyway, when you roll either the bubbling or the seething prefix rolls on them. Oh yeah, by the way, if you can alt over them, you can see as well the prefix and the suffixes. So, you know, if you're unsure as to what I was talking about for the flask, you can check them over there. But yeah, that's basically what I go for. I check whether or not I have the proper order of flasks with me, and if I'm missing something, I can usually compensate using flasks. And flasks are actually really powerful. Not even all of the unique flasks. There are some unique flasks which you really will have a strong amount of durability with, for example, or damage. But even just getting utility flasks like these are going to be really helpful. Like a diamond flask, for example, is great for characters that can have a decent amount of crit chance. If you are able to bring a diamond flask with you, your damage will spike tremendously. And of course, my particular order, at least what I would go for, is that I will first go for a good life flask if I don't have one yet, and then go for an armor flask, which will either usually be a Lion's Roar or a Rumi's Concoction granite flask. You could go with, of course, your normal granite flasks, but for me, like, for example, if you can block anyway, Rumi's will automatically be better compared to just your normal granite flask, because they also give you a chance to block attack and spell damage regardless of the item that you have. As long as you can block, it will increase your layers of defense. And of course, if I don't block, then it's better to go for Lion's Roar, because it will give you an increase in melee damage, although sometimes you may find the knockback a little bit taxing on your clear speed, since of course they push enemies away. Like for example, if you're a Cyclone and you can kill them immediately, you keep pushing them away, or you know, if you go past them, they will just go behind you. But it's usually still effective anyway, because it gives you a more melee physical damage modifier, which is actually really powerful, on top of the 3000 armor. Then after that, I will look at my third flask, which I usually go for here as either a jade flask or a quartz flask, because the jade flask will also provide you a flat amount of evasion rating, and of course evasion rating is also good to have. I'll explain a little bit more on that later. And For more mobile builds, I will typically go for a quartz flask because it allows me to go through enemies because it grants you phasing, aside from the 10% chance to dodge attacks and spells. So that is also a very, very powerful form of utility when you cannot be stopped immediately or when you cannot be blocked by enemies. Then after that, for my fourth flask, what I would do is typically check if I have any resistances that are still lacking. So if, for example, I have just a absurdly low amount of resistances still, I will try and see if I have picked up a bismuth flask, or if I don't, any resistance that I will find lacking, I will try and get that. Like, for example, if I'm still really low on fire res, I will get a ruby flask, because not only does it provide you a high amount of fire res, it also reduces fire damage taken, so it decreases the overall damage that is being done to you as well, twice, so to speak, because it gives you the fire res to reduce the damage, right? And then it will also give you less fire damage taken, which will decrease the total amount a little bit more. And you know, that also goes for other resistances, like if I'm low on cold res, a sapphire flask would be very helpful. If I am having a lot of problems with lightning damage, although you rarely do so, I will go for a topaz flask, which will decrease the lightning damage taken. And of course, any other things left, like if chaos res is a little bit hurtful, or if I come across Al-Hazmin and his minions are doing a lot of damage to me, I will try and go for an Atziri's Promise, which converts some of your damage into chaos damage as well, and then you leech that chaos damage back as life, plus you get some chaos res. So as you can see, that provides a lot of extra utility and defense. Or if, for example, I don't have that, or if I don't have the ability, like if I am running a build that is pure fizz, so of course brutality will be there and nothing gets converted, I will just go for a regular amethyst flask and maybe roll something which will provide me with more defense, like increased armor during flask effect, increased evasion during flask effect, or maybe even increased attack speed to help me at least gain a little bit more DPS. And then lastly, check again, you know, if anything else is missing. That's always the best thing to go for. Just keep on checking every flask slot, seeing whether or not you are feeling I guess more comfortable with the layout. So if, for example, you feel pretty content with the setup, you can just go for more utility again, like a quicksilver flask, which will help you progress through the maps quicker, of course, because you can clear them easier because you have more moving speed. But if you feel that you are getting squishy, do not hesitate to drop your quicksilver flask and try to get another flask which will help you with your defenses, like a basalt flask, for example, which will increase your physical damage reduction, apart from the flat 3000 armor that you can get if you have a granite flask already. That will also prevent a little bit more physical damage being dealt to you, so that may also increase your chances of survival. And of course, with more survivability, you get less deaths. With less deaths, you get more XP. With more XP, you get to level up and you get to progress through the maps easier. You know, it's just that quick. So some of the other tips that I can provide for you is that if you can get yourself a form of charge generation, I mean, there's no reason to not get them anyway. So like, if for example you are going through this path whenever you are doing a melee build and you come across this area and you feel that you are a little bit squishy, it's always going to be a good option to go for the inexorable notable, because what it does is that if you climb into that cluster, you get some armor, and during the second node here, which is what I go for, I mean, you could also go for the flat armor if you want, but this is going to help us better for the charge generation because it already has a 10% chance to get an endurance charge when we get hit. Then when we get inexorable, that becomes 25% with the additional 15% chance that you can get an endurance charge when you are hit. And of course, you also get more life regen per second per endurance charge, and you have increased armor while stationary. So to put that into perspective, what while stationary technically means is that as long as you're not actively moving, like what I'm doing right now, if you pause, or even during short periods of time where you are like literally not moving at all, like either when you are stunned, when you are shocked, or not when you're shocked, when you're frozen rather, any period of no movement will be counted as stationary. So whenever that happens, any modifiers that work while you're stationary will apply to you. So at least that'll also give you a little bit more defense. Like for example, if you get stunned, of course when you get stunned you're not gonna move, you'll be stationary, you get more armor, right? And another good thing is that if you're a melee build, Blood Rage is typically nice because you gain a frenzy charge when you kill, and although it has a side effect where you gain 4% of your maximum life per second as physical damage being dealt to you while Blood Rage is active, but if you can compensate for the degen by an appropriate amount of life steal or some form of life sustain, you typically won't feel that much of a difference anyway, or you will still remain at high health, or at full health rather. So that is also one thing that you can go for. One thing that I can say as well, that is that if you suddenly start dying again in higher tier maps, you know, you don't need to get stressed out and say that your build has reached its limit. I mean, if you're still in maps, there's still plenty of room for improvement, trust me. So what I typically do after that is to check whether or not the map that I'm running is actually proportionate to my level and to my HP. So, you know, you may get too excited at times and keep on using or running the highest tier maps that you can find, but sometimes it is going to be good for you to just, you know, step back a couple tiers and continue on that level for the meantime, so that at least you can level up safer, because when you level up anyway, you will get more passives which you can use to allocate on the tree. And of course eventually, you know, if you're gonna be farming pretty quickly while you're still within the same level area, so to speak, you will eventually gain currency if you're in softcore, so you can trade, or of course, you know, you can craft the better items or gear that you're gonna go for. So once that happens as well, and I see that everything's pretty okay at least, I will check my Flask layout. Maybe I have a little bit too much utility or damage in my current Flask layout, you know? Maybe I may have to drop my Diamond Flask to get myself a Quartz Flask, so that will add another layer of defense, because if I have some evasion, I have some armor, and then I have a chance to dodge, which is separate from evasion, that adds another layer of defense, which I will of course explain in a few minutes. If that is going to be the case, then of course you just switch that out, try it again. If you feel that it's pretty okay, then no problem. But if of course that is still proving to be a bit of a problem for you, I mean, well, I don't have any orbs of regret right now, but I mean, you can pick these up anyway in the map for free, you know? You should always try and see like whether or not you can drop a few more damage notes. Like for example, maybe if you start dying at tier 12 maps, you can drop your swift skirting for a bit, and then, you know, just max out the Scion life wheel, or go down here and get some of the life passives that are here. You know, there's always some form of adjustment that you can do which will not hamper your build's damage too much, but will improve your build's durability by a lot. So towards the end, maybe you can see whether or not you can drop a little bit more of your damage passives for more health, and then, you know, once of course you gain more levels and then you feel more comfortable with your build, like for example you get the upgrade to have better items with higher rolls of life, that's when you can try and decrease your life again and respec back into more damage passives. I mean, some people, I don't know why, but some people usually forget that you can just pick up the orbs of regret and just use them, you know? I mean, not unless you're power trading, so to speak, where everything that you pick up has to be sold. I mean, they will just lay there anyway. I mean, if you look at my Valors, I haven't used any of my Valors. I've even tried to sell them at one point, and still nobody's using them. It's because we are getting tons of these extra forms of currency that sometimes people forget to use, you know? So don't hesitate to respec out of your damage passives into more health if you feel that you are being a little bit more squishy. And then if that is still the case, then of course you can check out your Flask layout. Maybe you can add more defense or utility, and you know, maybe you can check if you have proper rolls on your Flasks, because removing being curse immune and being freeze immune is very, very, very helpful. And usually, as long as you have these two for your normal Flasks like these, when you're non-uniques, you will also have a pretty good time, or at least have a pretty smooth progression while you're going through the maps. Okay, now here is the juicy part that I've been talking about, which is the layers of defense that we have in Path of Exile. So let's say, for example, I can block, right? So I have a Rumis here, and I have a Jade Flask, and I have a Quartz Flask, right? Despite the Quartz Flask being a chance to dodge, it works more like block instead of evasion, because evasion has a little bit more complex counters to it. Because from what I can recall correctly, the higher the evasion you have, the higher the counter that you have that attacks get evaded. So for each time you get hit, there will be a sort of counter where you will eventually reach a limit, and then that hit that reaches the limit will eventually be guaranteed to hit you. And then after that, the counter is reset, and then you go through the same thing again. All right? So the higher the evasion that you have, the bigger the counter's limit will be. So let's say, for example, you get hit and you have all three forms of defense, right? So what happens first is that the evasion will take place. Have you evaded the attack? Yes. Great. Damage prevented. Have you not evaded the attack? Was it a successful hit? Well, let's see. How many percent of dodge do you have? If it's through phasing, well, you have a pretty low percent chance, but it still acts as a layer of defense, because it still gives the damage something to go through first before it goes to the next stage. So that is always going to be helpful. So going back, have you evaded the attack? Yes. Have you not evaded it? Next layer will kick in. Have you dodged the attack? Yes. Damage prevented. Has it not been dodged? Nope. Well then, how much block chance do you have? Was the block successful? Great. Oh yeah, damage prevented. Was it not successful? Then the damage will be applied and will start going through conversions first. So after that, that is when you have any elemental conversions or any other damage conversion types that will take place first. Like for example, if you get hit with a pure fizz damage, right? Let's say 100 damage should be the thing. And then you have maybe Crusader, maybe a Crusader prefix that has you gain, or where you take maybe 10% of your physical damage as lightning, for example. So the 10% of that 100 will be converted to lightning. So instead of being a 100 physical damage hit, it will be 90 fizz, 10 lightning. Then after that, it will go through the damage reductions part. Now that is where you can see, well, how much of the physical damage will be reduced, right? So you have a 45% reduction from the 90, so that will be applied, and then the lightning damage will also go through the lightning res as well. So 75% of the 10 lightning damage will go through. So instead of being dealt 10 lightning damage, you will only be dealt 2.5. And then of course the final layer will be any increases and reductions to damage. So both of them will be calculated at the same time. Like for example, you got hit from that hit was while you were wearing an Abyssus. So an Abyssus will also give you increased physical damage taken. So before it applies as the total, the Abyssus will increase the physical damage that was dealt to you before it gets applied. And then of course, if you have Fortify, the Fortify will help reduce the damage a little bit more again. And if you have endurance charges, that will also decrease your physical damage reduction, or that will increase your physical damage reduction rather. That is when they'll also start applying. So that is basically how the layers of defense work. I'm going to include a link in the description from Engineering Eternity. He has provided a beautiful video regarding the forms of damage and how you take damage, how you maximize the layers of defense in beautiful detail. Like, what I said was just one small example. There are still a lot of conversions there are still a lot of calculations to be done. Well, guys, that has been basically it. That has been my checklist on, how I prepare myself for the maps and how I progress through the Atlas. I hope it has provided you guys at least some form of insight as to how you can get yourselves ready and how you can progress better. Maybe there were things that you forgotten about. That's still pretty common. And there may be things that have been new to you which you haven't known about, which is great, and I hope you guys have learned from it. And this has basically helped me with any league start build that I have gone, and regardless whether or not it has a guide on it. And for me personally, I am gonna go for the Lightning Nova looking skill on the teaser that they released. So if you want to follow on how that build is gonna go, I mean, well, you're gonna have to head on over to Twitch so that you can follow me on there. And of course, hit that subscribe button on YouTube so that you can see any future content that I'm going to release pertaining to that build, because it seems pretty interesting. And of course, as always, guys, like the video if you do, dislike it if you don't, and please provide any feedback that you have. I mean, any form of constructive criticism is always going to help me out, because I am still fairly new to the YouTube content creation scene. So, any form of advice and help that I can get is always going to be good for me. And yeah, that has been it for us today, guys, and I shall be seeing you all in Ray class soon, gents.